Welcome into Texans Today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and coming up on the program today, 4 surprise trade candidates for the Houston Texans this offseason. And I'm not talking Dameon Pierce. I'm not talking about Metchie, Hutchinson, guys that we've talked about before, not on the list. I'm not talking, Juice Scruggs. I want guys that, if they got traded, would actually surprise you. And I think there's a small semblance that these guys could be traded. I'm not saying at all that these guys are on the chopping block or they're, gonna get traded. I would even say none of these guys, I would have it as a 50-50 shot. They're more on the 10, 5, 10, 15% chance that they get traded. Maybe slim, but they're still, so you're saying there's a little bit of a chance. Now, before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who's hit that sub button so far. And if you are subbed, I want you to go ahead and tell me what you like about the show and how we could get better. I'm always looking to improve the program. And if you're not subbed yet, I'd love to know why. Let me know what I could do, what I could change to get you to subscribe. Because I promise you this, you hit that sub button, give me 1 week. If you don't love it, you can unsubscribe. No skin off your back. It's 100% free. But let me prove to you why we are the #1 Texans channel here on YouTube. And got some surprising candidates. First one, this one, Christian Kirk, is going to raise a lot of eyebrows. And funny enough, the reason why I actually made this video was because of somebody I interviewed had mentioned Christian Kirk possibly being a part of a trade. And I know what you're thinking. This is like the Carmelo Anthony Hawks, man. He hasn't even stepped foot on the field, and we're talking about getting rid of him. Carmelo Anthony jersey should be in the rafters for the Hawks, by the way. But that's neither here nor there. Christian Kirk, I think, is going to be a really good receiver. He's looked good so far in OTAs, and I think the Texans got him for a steal, right? A 7th-round pick for a guy the Jags were going to cut, and I think he fits pretty well into this offense and what this offense wants to do. But, he's had some injury problems. That's the big issue with Kirk, right? 12 games, 8 games the past 2 seasons, and even though the numbers look good there on the screen for you in 2023 and before that, it's, worth questioning, is he that same level of player? And I actually interviewed Cecil Shorts earlier this month, and I asked him, I said, is there anybody on the team that you could see get traded? And he had this interesting nugget about talking around Cecil Shorts. Let me kick it away to Cecil.
Then maybe Metchie, right? Depending on what people think his value is. I think the best is still ahead for Metchie, big time. Again, I'm going to throw Christian Kirk out there. Just because you traded for him does not mean he's not expendable. Does not mean that if Noel comes in and truly dominates, and you have an idea of Nick's like, hey, I want him in the slot, and he's probably not going to back up. I can have maybe Braxton back him up, right? We can ship him off and go get a 5th round or a 6th round pick or something. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case either. And I love Christian. I think Christian's going to be a baller. I think he fits the offense. I talked about it with my man Stressens last week about how he can kill the option route game, which I think which will happen this year with the Nick Caley offense. But you asked about guys that can possibly bring some value to other teams. And I tell you what, too, it's a good thing because that means you have depth on your own roster, right? Yeah. You have so much depth on the roster that you're able to get rid of a guy that can bring value to somebody else because they're that talented, right? That just means your roster is extremely talented as well. So it's a good problem to have, but it's going to be some interesting questions at linebacker, in the DB room, and then we got to watch that receiver room extremely close.
So you heard it there from Cecil, and like I said, this was kind of the reason why I decided to make this video, because whenever I was interviewing, whenever I was talking to him, I actually even followed up. I said, hey, I just want to hear that correctly. You said Christian Kirk, right? Like, I'm not thinking of a different player on the Texans. The same Christian Kirk the Texans traded for, that's who you're saying the Texans might trade away. And yes, he doubled down and he said, Christian Kirk is somebody I could see if Jalen Noel and John Metchie both make the team and both bring something this offseason, Kirk could become dispensable. And now I don't necessarily agree with Cecil Shorts on this one. This one I would put at like the 5% chance of it happening, of a Christian Kirk trade happening. But you never know. The NFL's a crazy league and things could happen. Hell, Stephon Diggs was on a boat with a bunch of people partying with some crazy stuff, and this league, right? You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen. And funny enough, I don't think the Christian Kirk trade is that likely. But this next guy, I actually think might be a little bit more. I don't know. Call me crazy. Number 2 for my surprise trade candidates, Blake Fisher, offensive tackle. And if you've watched the channel before, I've been very hesitant on Blake Fisher coming into this season. Like, is he doing the right things to get out there and improve year 2 and kind of take that right tackle spot by the horns and be the guy on the right side for this Texans offensive line? He's a young kid, right? Was drafted out of Notre Dame in round 2 of last year, right after the Texans took Kamari Lassiter. And at the moment, I have Ariante Ursary starting there at right tackle, but very much so he could end up being the starting left tackle, the backup left tackle. He could be the backup swing tackle, and Blake Fisher could take that right tackle spot. But if Blake Fisher doesn't improve this year, if he doesn't show himself to be a starting caliber player 4 years moving forward, maybe this regime looks at it themselves and says, hey, can we get something for him while the getting's good, while teams need offensive line help this year, and maybe offload him? I don't know. Like I said, these trade candidates aren't guys who I think are likely to get traded. But in the back of your mind, if certain things happen, there's a good chance. If Cam Robinson looks like an all-star over there at the left side and Ariante Ursary starts at right tackle, what's stopping you from trading a guy like Blake Fisher who's still really young, and you could maybe even get some good, trade back, capital for him, right? Like a former second-round pick. He's still under 25 years old, playing offensive line in the NFL. A lot of teams need offensive linemen and good depth. So maybe you could squeeze out maybe a third, maybe a second-round pick. I'd call me crazy, but I like store-bought pesto. But Blake Fisher could definitely easily be a guy who the Texans down the road look as expendable if he doesn't take that right tackle spot by the horn. So I talked about Christian Kirk, talked about Blake Fisher. Next up, I'm going to talk about another guy another reason why I made this video around Derek Barnett, because Bleacher Report listed him as a guy that the Texans could end up trading some point this offseason or this season. And whenever I first read that, I was like, this is absolutely nuts. This is crazy. Texans signed him to a one-year $4 million deal this offseason. So obviously they don't have a ton invested in him, but I love the player that you're getting in Derek Barnett, right? This past year, 26 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, 2 touchdowns this year for Derek Barnett. Led the league in fumble recovery touchdowns, which a pretty niche stat. But still, he was awesome this year as a rotational edge rusher. And I said it whenever I broke down that PFF article last week. Derek Barnett, you want guys who can stack up on the defensive line and get after the quarterback. We saw what the Eagles did to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. You want guys who, even if somebody's tired, put the next guy in and they can pin their ears back and get after the QB. And Derek Barnett fits that, range, right? He's on the right side of 30. He's 28, about to turn 29. So he's still a young, considered a younger player in the NFL. Now, with that being said, like I said, you could maybe get some decent draft capital out of it. And this would be the only way I'm even considering trading Derek Barnett, is if at some point this season, a team goes, hey, we'll give you a 3rd-round pick for Derek Barnett, a backup, right? A backup, essentially a backup on your team. This would be hard for me to, turn my nose up at. So I'm actually going to ask you this question. Would you make this trade? If a team came to you and said, hey, we'll give you a 3rd-round pick for Derek Barnett, what would you do? Give me a yes, give me a no down in the comments section. I'm interested to see what you have to say. I'll give you my thoughts here in just a moment. I might be nuts, but I actually wouldn't do that trade. If I'm the Houston Texans, I wouldn't do that trade, especially if it's looking like I'm in the driver's seat in the AFC South once again this year. If I'm looking like I'm making a playoff run, why give up a piece to possibly help you in the playoffs, help you down the road for a 3rd-round pick? This team should be in win-now mode. This team should be looking at, hey, how do we win the Super Bowl this year? How do we get to the Super Bowl with this squad, with C.J. Stroud, with Nico Collins, with Will Anderson Jr., this young core of amazing talent, Derek Stingley? How do we get to the Super Bowl? And I don't think acquiring a third-round pick in next year's draft for a really good edge rusher helps you achieve that goal. And it kind of goes along with a lot of the guys that I'm talking about in today's video, right? Probably wouldn't trade these guys unless the circumstances become, amazing for you. Like if a team offers you maybe a third, possibly even a second-round pick. I'm getting too far ahead of myself. Not a second-round pick for Derek Barnett. But still, it's interesting to kind of see because the Texans are in a really good spot with a ton of depth and guys that are expendable on this team if they want to go down that route about acquiring more draft capital and gearing up more for 2026, 2027, and beyond. I have one more candidate to break down on today's show. My last surprise trade candidate is Henry To'oTo'o. And like I said, I like Henry To'oTo'o. I think he's a really good player, and I think he has a lot that he showed us last year, right? 105 tackles for the Texans, 7 tackles for loss, 3 pass breakups, a forced fumble, an interception. I've been following his offseason. His wife, Cheyenne, is, really awesome on TikTok. Kind of shows you behind the scenes of them working out, getting ready for the season. Really appreciate that if you're watching. But with this linebacker room, right? The Texans run a 4-2-5 essentially. They most of the time are only going to have 2 linebackers out there. If Christian Harris really shows out in this contract year and shows his stuff, if Azeez Al-Shire plays like we know he can, if EJ Speed and maybe some of these other guys the Texans brought in, like a Neiman, maybe they could show out a little bit. I think it more has to do with guys like an EJ Speed, but we talked a lot about Christian Harris trade rumors. He's in the final year of his rookie contract. So, yes, that one makes more sense. But if EJ Speed is one of your starters alongside Azeez Al-Shire, that also means Henry To'oTo'o is kind of the, odd man out, kind of left out a little bit. And another guy where I could see a lot of teams very interested in a Henry To'oTo'o if he became available via trade. A lot of teams need a starting linebacker, and I think on most teams, Henry To'oTo'o would start. I think on more than half the teams in the NFL, if he got traded to them, he would be a starting linebacker. He's that good for this team, but the Texans, like I said, they only run really 2 linebacker sets, and they already have one guy set in Azeez Al-Shire, who's going to get that other spot right next to him. Like I said at the top of the show, though, all these are surprise trade candidates. I don't want everybody going after my head saying, Jeremy, you're so stupid. How could you even think about trading this guy? I don't think these guys are going to get traded. But on the off chance that there is a surprise trade, look for those 4 names that I mentioned in today's show. Going to revisit this one more time at the back half of the show. I want to thank everybody who's made it to the end of the video. You're an absolute real one. And if you are, hey, if you're not already subbed, come on. What else do I got to do? Let me know. What do I got to do to get you to subscribe to the channel? If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much and have a great day.